Everybody, this is DM Mike, and this is the next campaign diary for DOIP. I'm going to go ahead and put the stats up so you can take a look. You're going to see, maybe by looking at some of these dice rolls, that, hey, not much happened. Well, you know what? A lot happened. And I want to address this really, really fast. I think a lot of people who are running this campaign are probably new DMs, right? I mean, some of us are going to be veterans like I. This is my second playthrough, and I've played many other campaigns prior to this. But there are going to be a lot of people out there who are just running it for the first time. And one thing you're going to notice is, after any session, just pick one, any session that you go through, sometimes some of those sessions are really going to stand out. And I think there's going to be no clear indication as to why.
Why?
Sometimes you need to sit down and think about the session as soon as it ends. Like you say goodbye to everybody, and you kick everybody out of the house, and everybody goes home, and come back to the table and just sit there and think about what happened in that campaign. And I think 9 times out of 10, what you're going to find the answer, what you're going to find when you're thinking about this, when you're thinking about your session, you're thinking about how things kind of fit together and why was it so much better than the other ones. Even though the other ones weren't awful, they were fun, they were engaging, but sometimes some sessions just stand out above all the others. And I think I know what it is. Well, at least some of it, not all of it. But part of it is this element of risk. Risk plays a huge, huge factor in the game. And I think for DMs, you kind of build in risk, sometimes naturally, sometimes not even thinking about it. You're building it in. But you'll notice, I think, that the sessions that stand out the most are when not only you are taking the risk as a DM, but most of those exceptional sessions are going to come when the players take a risk. And as a new DM too, you're going to see this kind of lockstep mantra I think a lot of players have. And there's nothing negative about this. There's negative and positives to everything players do, obviously. But there is kind of a lockstep mantra that I have seen in everything I've ever ran, from long-term campaigns that run for years to short-term campaigns to one-shots to some that just last maybe a couple weeks. And that is, don't split the party, right? That seems to be like, in the 10 Commandments of being a D&D player.
The Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 15.
But I'll tell you this, some of the most dynamic times I've had, most fun times I've had at the table is when the party splits. Now, yes, it can be reckless. I mean, sometimes people just take off. I've seen players just take off and leave the party like, what the hell are you doing, right? There's a reckless abandonment to these kinds of things, right? And I feel like that's a high level of risk that almost isn't necessary. I find personally, in combat encounters, in dungeon crawls, or even in a town or whatnot, the most dynamic stuff comes when people aren't clustered and all over each other and barely moving through a dungeon because they're too afraid to get away from each other. I find that when people split up, not recklessly, and not just to do it for no reason at all, but take more risks and kind of get out of that safety net, that's when things really, really change. It's not something you can force. It's not something you can even ask, I think. I think it's just something that happened naturally at the table. And the last week we played, I'm sorry this is a little long-winded, but the last week we played, it was an exceptional game. And why? Because people split up. There was risk, and people kind of tried something new. And I think that really opened things up. Anyway, long-winded thing. This is really geared more towards those new DMs who are running this session. I think you're just going to find that some of your best sessions are when things are risky. Now, we had a 4-hour game. I think what the stats talked about there, I think we had about 4 hours. Matter of fact, yeah, it was exactly 4 hours. And we spent like 3 hours in Fanlin. And it was a lot of fun. People were over at the church doing some risky business, trying to enchant their weapons. That was one thing. It was kind of cool. 3 of the characters, I think it was Naya, Seamus, and Gib, had to help the priestess destroy artifacts, religious artifacts, to help their weapons become enchanted. And this was a very dangerous thing to do. And in my campaign in Fanlin, I have the church there, and below it is a reliquary. And in that reliquary are like the townsmen's people, all the people's, the families, their religious artifacts and whatnot. And they had to do a risky venture here to destroy an artifact to transfer its essence into a weapon. And I had a whole thing of rolling to see what happens and whatnot. Will the artifact just explode? Will it actually enchant the weapon, or will it cause damage to the weapon so it might be enchanted but it doesn't last for very long? We did this whole thing, right? And it was a cool little scene, and I made it very clear to all the players that no matter what your religious background is, the characters themselves, you know that this is a very sacrilegious thing to do, and it's a very desperate thing to do. But with a dragon breathing down their necks and a possible banshee and having to clear out Axeholm, this huge fortress they don't know anything about, Wester hesitantly authorized this kind of sacrilegious rite to occur, and they only were allowed to chant like 3 weapons. That's as much as Wester was willing to give up, and the town members as well, for this kind of, this ritual. So that was like the first risk that kind of happened there in the town, and it was kind of fun to do, just to see what was going to happen, or what's going to happen in Axeholm once they actually start to use these weapons. Another risk to highlight in Fanlin was Beazle, who practically made a deal with Mia Thornton, I believe, who is the Miners Guild, a Zentrium agent. She revealed herself to him of who she was and who she was working for, and she kind of made a deal with him to get more intel about Wester and the different decisions and things that were going on in Fanlin, because she was not secure or confident in Wester's leadership, even though things are okay, but everybody's under an incredible amount of pressure. But Beazle said yes to this. He said yes to the hag to make a deal with her, and now he has said yes to a Zentrium agent, and he doesn't know what that's going to entail, or what the consequences are going to be, or even what the positive things are going to be from that. He ended up going outside and talking to Prospero and saying, hey, do you know anything about them? And even Prospero, who lives in the Underdark, knew about Zentrium agents and was very hesitant and felt a little uncertain about him making a deal with somebody, first of all, he doesn't know very well, but also is connected to this underworld criminal organization, and that this could be maybe a good career move for a thief, or it could be something that's going to be horrible. But again, we took a risk, right? Beazle took a risk. He's taken risks several times in these situations, and who knows, they could pay off greatly, or they can also pay off in a very terrible negative way. Another big risk that happened at that night was Naya. Now, I think a couple campaign diaries ago, when they were at Butterskull Ranch, when they were protecting the horses coming from Butterskull Ranch back to Fanlin, they were attacked by gnolls, but they were also attacked by the dragon itself. And during that encounter, they saw these ghostly knights on the battlefield, and it was like they were trying to figure out what this was. Well, even prior to that, these knights or cavaliers have showed up outside of Fanlin. They've never come into the town, but Naya and many of the other characters have seen them several times. Well, I think Naya was trying to make a connection between these ghosts and these knights who they don't know who they are, have just magically showed up out of nowhere. So she wanted to see if she could talk to one, if she could call one out or find one on her own. So everybody that night went back to the inn, and Naya goes out by herself, like at midnight, while the town watch is going on, and goes out into, leaves Fanlin, goes out a little ways, and just tries to see if she can make contact with one of these mysterious knights. Well, she did. One of the knights was there in the moonlight, and it was a nice little role-playing moment. I remember it being very tense, because she was by herself. She didn't even let any of the other characters know where she was, but she went out there to try to make contact with this knight, and she managed to get him to come off his horse and walk over, and he was a good maybe 15 feet from her, and then suddenly he attacks. There's barely any words exchanged. I think she asked him, who are you and why are you here? But the only answer he gave her was, a broadsword and a shield upside the head. Now, he missed because she was ready for this. She was kind of, she had, I think, Sacred Flame cast so she could see, but as soon as he attacked, we rolled initiatives, and she kind of cast herself invisible. And of course, I was at disadvantage every time I tried to swing, and tried to attack her. And she ran back to Fanlin. But, it was a pretty interesting moment. I didn't expect it. I had no clue that Naya was going to do that evening. None of that was planned, and that's what made it fun. That's what made it entertaining, and that's what risk brings out. So she ended up telling him about it the next morning, and the characters had no choice at this point. They listened. What else can they do? They just they're on high alert now for wherever these knights end up showing up. But they ended up leaving Fanlin and going to Axeholm. Now, of course, this is like 25 miles, maybe 20 miles to get there. And of course, over Axeholm comes a storm, I think from the west, coming off the coast. And it's covering Axeholm and the surrounding grasslands, and it's just dark black ominous clouds. And this was a lot of fun because here we are at Axeholm, and if you ran this, of course, it's very difficult to get into Axeholm. It's tricky. You can do it. There's a couple different ways. Basically, it got down to Gib and Beazle, who snuck in the arrow slits or the murder holes, whatever they're called, to get in there. And they cased the joint. It was very, very quiet. There wasn't a lot of movement. Very little things have moved or survived inside Axeholm. And it was just a lot of tension. And that's what I love about these environments, especially Axeholm. There is tension here, especially with two of the smallest characters, one with both pretty much ranged characters going in and trying to figure out how to open the gate and try not to make a lot of noise. Well, eventually they did make a lot of noise trying to unjam the gate, which had bones and different things in it and just gunk that had built up in Axeholm for a very, very long time. And here again was tension. More tension and more risk by the characters, because down the hall they could hear something coming closer to them, and this panicked Beazle and Gib, and they quickly kind of hid in corners and whatnot. And of course, around the corner come two of the dwarven ghouls, one of many that are in Axeholm. Now, they didn't give away their position. At the time, there was no rolling. I didn't roll initiative or anything like that because it hadn't turned into a combat encounter just yet. But I think it was Naya and Seamus who could actually see through the holes and see the threat. And we rolled initiative, and they attacked with Moonbeam and a couple other things that could get long range and actually hit them. And they managed to kill the dwarves, the ghoulish dwarves pretty quickly. But it was nice. It was nice suspense to have there with the two trying to get that gate unjammed while the other two were outside trying to lift the gate but couldn't do it. Again, this thing is built to repel armies, and I know these characters were very, very strong, but it wasn't going to be an easy venture to get into this thing. Now, they managed to get the gate up, but of course the main door to get into Axeholm has got rock and debris that's collapsed over the years in front of it, and of course it's locked on the interior side, right? So Gib and Beazle made their way... Gib and Beazle made their way on the inside and got into the main foyer. And of course, with all the noise that had been built up at that time, I can't remember, I'm missing something. I think something happened in that moment. But they were trying to open the door, and they unlatching it, and all the rocks and stuff being moved and shifted and shuffled away started to make a lot of noise. And eventually this attracted more ghouls. And in the inside, we have nothing but Beazle and Gib kind of on the lookout, Beazle trying to unlatch the door. As he does so, it makes a tremendous amount of noise. I think that's the information I was missing. It makes a tremendous amount of noise because it hasn't been touched in like 100 years or so. And then, of course, 5 ghouls, around 5, they're not exactly sure, come barreling down from somewhere inside Axeholm and start approaching these two who are now stuck in a corner. Everybody else is outside of Axeholm trying to get in, and the last thing we did was Beazle unlatching, pushing the door open. I think it was Grok pushing Naya through the crack to try to get her into the room as fast as possible, and then Gib firing up a spell, aiming it, and that was it. That's where we stopped Axeholm. So it was a night of really unexpected things and a night full of risk, and man, that just made it so entertaining. All right, guys, we play this Saturday to continue Axeholm, and I've updated the map and done a couple other things. You can see it in my prep videos, but a lot more is to come. All right, guys, see you in the next one.